A cackling alert rang on alien frequencies. All fleets, prepare for an unopposed sweep. These humans just are no threat. But when their sensors picked up the large, unknown warship entering their contested space, shock rippled through every command deck. Humanity had come to fight. For millennia, the galaxy's power structure was characterized by the iron grip of massive alien empires. Fueled by the lifeblood of its conquered worlds, the Xerix Dominion fucking dominated half the spiral arm, subjugating lesser races who bucked and bucked and bucked against its might, before sinking its teeth into a wellspring of new worlds. Against them rose the Vorkan Conclave, its expansionist philosophies conflicting with Xerix aspirations at every opportunity. Caught between these two behemoths were dozens of lesser civilizations, eternally mired in the crossfire of resource grabs, border disputes, and politicking. Earth, by contrast, was an afterthought. An A.I.'s perspective on humanity's arrival on the galactic stage was division at best, ridicule at worst. The greater powers considered Terrans too new to the galactic stage, lacking the centuries of advanced thought that older empires had developed. For decades, the hard-few human diplomatic missions received only cursory notice, more as a gesture of condescending courtesy than as the expression of sincere interest. Alien admirals and ambassadors in turn regarded Earth as a distant curiosity, neither a threat nor especially useful. This indifference elicited no response, but humanity was not standing still. Scientists, entrepreneurs, and explorers from Earth flitted around the galaxy in little, privately funded vessels, learning about alien engineering and political structures and warfare doctrines. They analyzed starship schematics obtained from open-source records, collected suggestions of advanced propulsion technologies, compiled a broad catalog of military encounters. While the galaxy turned a blind eye to humanity, humanity did not ignore the galaxy. Meanwhile, Terran observers noted an increasing background level of tension between the Xerix Dominion and Vorkan Conclave during these studies. Praying to gain control of the Sinora Corridor, a sparse sector rich in rare metals and points of warp nexus, both sides fought to establish dominance. Skirmishes flared regularly. Fleets stationed at the borders, challenging one another to set off a full-scale war. Meanwhile, tiny empires scuttled, forming alliances or hiding behind neutrality in hopes of outliving the conflagration. So for the time being, Earth continued its accustomed posture of passive neutrality. That all changed when Terran intelligence discovered the full extent of the impending war. If the Xerix and Vorkan were to unleash their full power, entire regions of the galaxy would be devastated. Billions of innocent lives, including those of human colonies, would be in danger of extermination. The Council of the Terran Confederation debated for weeks on if they could afford to risk open involvement. Some counselors felt that Earth should be more discreet and wait for the dust to settle. Others claimed that remaining in the shadows would condemn humankind to be subservient when the victors eventually looked to every other territory. Ultimately, the hawkish side won out. Earth had an ace up its sleeve the galaxy never actually thought to fear, a warship built under wraps. Decades of careful study and clandestine engineering had produced it. A Terran flagship, the TNS Indomitable lay nestled within the remote shipyards of the Kuiper Belt, waiting to unleash the best in Terran ingenuity. Not the biggest ship in the galaxy by any means, but it featured radical energy distribution grids, multi-phase shielding, and cutting-edge kinetic lance weapon systems. The ship's designers, a cadre of top human engineers, had crammed centuries of collective knowledge into a single behemoth. The Indomitable wasn't designed to fight. It wasn't designed to win. It was designed to destroy all of the world's many delusions about Earth's military irrelevance. One such crew was brought together under Captain Naomi Valance, within the Terran Confederation Navy. She was a person who, if noticed at all by alien strategists, would seem pretty middle of the road or nothing special. But this too worked to Earth's advantage. Captain Valance had studied from the grand engagements of the galaxy's greatest fleets. She studied data on Xerix swarm tactics and Vorkan infiltration strategies. They had analyzed every known alien doctrine of war. Where others saw a maze of invincible strength, Valance gleaned glaring weaknesses and exploitable weaknesses. Thus, in the Sinora Corridor, tensions reached the breaking point. The Tukar Dominion's High Warlord, Kuraz Reth, declared a final campaign to take the corridor from the Vorkan Conclave. Through their propaganda broadcasts, the Vorkan had been described as a plague to be eliminated. Meanwhile, Vorkan Admiral Suresh plotted a few potential defensive lines, trusting in the advanced cloaking technologies to which their fleets had access. Both empires built up hundreds of warships, from speedy corvettes to titanic dreadnoughts that dwarfed entire city skylines in their bulk. Elsewhere in the galaxy, observers braced for trouble. Even smaller factions, typically buoyed into the background by showier ones, started to posture for scraps of territory. And no one was under any illusions about the function Earth would fulfill. Terrans, in this model, would cower behind neutrality or pale protests that would be lost in the cosmic static. But then the first rumors seeped through, a new warp signature, Terran in origin, moving into the Sinora corridor. The announcement was quickly brushed aside by strategists at both Xerix and Vorkan. One can barely keep up with advanced warp technology, much less trace the paths turned before, said one of the Vorkan admirals. If they even show up in the Sinora corridor, it will be to surrender or plead for our mercy. The Xerix, for one, laughed at the idea and concentrated on their great plan to crush the Vorkan. They were on alert for substantial reinforcements from the Vorkan's allies, not for a single Earth ship. In the meantime, Captain Valance and her officers found the weight of history pressing down on them. The TNS Indomitable didn't just carry human lives, it carried the entirety of Earth's reputation. If they did not succeed, humanity would become the laughingstock of the galaxy. But if they did succeed, if they could prove a decisive impact on the result of the Sinora Corridor campaign, everything would change. Aliens would have to consider Earth a serious player in the universe. It was a long shot that could lift humankind from obscurity into a place at the galactic table or relegate them to permanent insignificance. Thus, the Indomitable thundered through interstellar space, her experimental warp drives roaring, the Terran crew arranged in queue with excitement and anxious energy. Every step they took forward was a step into the unknown. Open pages of alien fleets laid around them, each prepared to embark on another mundane conquest. The empires of the galaxy had never been afraid of humans, until now. Citation: the TNS Indomitable, emerging from warp in the Troll Holler early on a cold morning, by Earth standard. Titans were soon to clash as juggernaut starships pivoted into formation in every direction. Dreadnoughts of the Xerix Dominion patrolled like apex predators, mounting missile arrays and energy cannons capable of slagging a continent in minutes. Across from them, Vorkan carriers sent forth squadrons of stealth bombers that disappeared into the darkness of space, lying in wait to ambush unsuspecting prey. Set against this cosmic backdrop of impending warfare, the Indomitable appeared almost trivial in scale. Captain Valance had noticed how her ship's sensor pings barely registered in the alien networks. "We're below their threshold, literally," said Lieutenant O'Meric, the Indomitable's tactical officer, a note of dry sardonicism in his voice. "They're treating us like a passing freighter." But that was exactly the aliens' mistake, ignoring the Indomitable. As soon as the Terran warship dropped out of warp, it went to work analyzing battlefield conditions. A specialized AI suite fused data from hundreds of probes discreetly launched into the outer space. These probes grabbed onto the signals of the Xerix and Vorkan fleets, plotting formation patterns, energy fluctuations, shield signatures, comm exchanges. A mosaic of wires and pings coalesced on the Indomitable's command screens, revealing a blue versus a red, a view showing both factions' strengths and weaknesses. The first shot of the Sinora Corridor campaign came a moment after that. Xerix cruisers, arrayed in a forward wedge, punched plasmic artillery into the outer rings of the Vorkan defenses. Great flickers of energy crackled across shields, and hulls churned into silent explosions of flame as advanced weaponry landed. An answering barrage from the Vorkan saturation-filled space with incendiary beams that cleaved through lesser vessels. As the fighting raged, the Indomitable hung free at medium range, untagged, sniping coursing data to optimize its approach. As High Warlord Kuraz Reth spotted an unknown Terran signal on the Xerix flagship, his subcommanders maintained it was irrelevant. "They are not, a defined threat," one intoned. An Earth ship alone can't be of significance, my lord. Kuraz Reth laughed a dismissive laugh. Focus on the Vorkin. Destroy them. Then, if the Terrans haven't run away squeaking by then, we sweep them aside. On the Vorkin side, Admiral Suresh was also seeing the same readings and having a similar conclusion. Earth has a reputation for old technology, Suresh told his staff. Let them watch if they wish. Before long, the Xerics will chase them off or turn them into scrap if they dare interfere. The Vorkin were at least more worried about balancing the unassailable threat of the Dominion's dreadnought line. Captain Valance identified an opportunity here in this general underestimation. She commanded the Indomitable to press deeper into the corridor, sliding close enough to assess the Xeric's rear lines without entering any direct firing arcs. The Terran crew had hurried with tight precision, each move exacting, each misstep risking a rain of alien fire. Yet the Indomitable had cutting-edge sensor masking technology acquired through the reverse engineering of lesser alien stealth technologies, along with Terran advancements in energy dampening. The humans didn't make a great attack. They hung around, very quietly gathering data on how the Xeric's warships cycled their shields and synced up with one another. As the fight dragged on, they all realized that both sides were entrenched in a grim stalemate. The Xeric's wedge advanced with tireless relentlessness, but the Vorkin flanking maneuvers compelled them to rein in their far men, leaving them exposed. The void was lit by explosions in rapid succession, and dead vessels drifted, venting atmosphere and debris. And then the Terrans struck first. The Indomitable struck with calculated force, launching a specialized kinetic lance, a projectile-based weapon encased with complex energy sheaths, focusing on a mid-sized Xerix frigate deployed to coordinate sensor data across the entire Dominion fleet. In a blink, the lance had perforated the warship's hull, breaking its middle spine loose and tossing it into turmoil. Xerix admirals flailed, briefly losing a vital sliver of battlefield intelligence. For the humans, it was a laser-guided display of their deadly ability. Howling Warlord Kuraz Reth snarled at this new intrusion. How dare they? Send dispatch interceptors to wipe out that Terran ship, he bellowed. A flight of Dominion interceptors peeled away from the central formation, converging on the Indomitable with deadly intent. Its pilots, accustomed to using ruthless tactics, figured on an easy kill. Instead, they discovered the Indomitable's point defense lasers answering with disturbing accuracy. On the bridge of the Terran ship, Lieutenant Omeric set up a near-foolproof defense grid. Its interceptors were slapped down in a flourish of short-range beams, their flotsam drifting in lifeless parabolas. It was a harsh wake-up call for the Xerics. They'd never thought humans could counter a high-speed fighter attack so effectively. As it unfolded from the Vorkin lines, Admiral Suresh became apprehensive. They destroyed a Dominion frigate and repulsed interceptors with relative ease, Suresh added, squinting. This changes the equation. The Vorkins still did not ally with the Terrans, however. Pride and distrust ran deep, so there would be no overture to unsqueeze, zero. Yet they had come to feel that Earth might no longer be the trivial thing they had taken it to be. The Indomitable seized on their momentum. Using fresh intel from its probes, the Terran ship made micro-jumps around the battlefield, short-range FTL bursts that disrupted the intercessor fleet's standard targeting procedures, whether Xerix or Vorkin. 1 second it was on the edges, taking potshots at a Dominion destroyer. The next it was suddenly there, right behind a pack of Vorkin corvettes, sending them into disarray. The left field move sowed confusion on all sides, as alien comms nets struggled to keep track of the Terran ship's position. But the Terrans also knew they could not keep at such tactics for long. Every micro-jump commed within the Indomitable's reactor, and the ship remained vastly outnumbered. A direct engagement between either faction's primary dreadnought line could be devastating. Captain Valance therefore targeted the surgical removal of critical assets, sensor frigates, supply ships, command vessels, all of which together broke the chain of command that bound each fleet. As the Terran tide pressed onward, alien commanders grew increasingly frustrated. Xerix captains, not used to targeting such slippery prey, unleashed wave after wave of missile salvos, only to see them explode ineffectually on the Indomitable's phasic shielding or trail behind as the Terran ship winked out of standard space. The Vorkins set up a complicated trap employing their cloaked bombers to fire at the Indomitable at an expected jump point. But the Terran sensor grid, augmented by their suite of stealth probes, detected just enough of the cloaked energies of the passing vessels, applying evasive course changes at the last moment. This crafty avoidance instilled disbelief in the hearts of battle-hardened alien admirals. Across open channels, panic calls rang out. "We can't pin it down. Their shield frequencies are constantly changing. Our scans can't track them." Never had these galactic powers labored so viciously against a single warship, much less one from a civilization they had long considered technologically backward. The more they sought to encircle the Terrans, the thinner their own lines were stretched, leaving them vulnerable to opportunistic strikes from the other faction. The Sinora corridor was suddenly less about a war between the Xerics and the Vorkans, and more about a scramble to respond to this erstwhile human threat. Alien casualties and losses mounted. The Dominion Una, a key battleship to a chain reaction triggered by the Indomitable's well-placed kinetic lances, whilst the Vorkan had 2 carriers forced to withdraw under sustained Terran beam bombardments. For the mere mortals, it was a test of endurance. Signs of reactor stress blinked ominously on the Indomitable's bridge. Critical systems were on the brink of collapse from repeated micro-jumps. Whole sections of the hull had scars where energy bolts had missed. A direct confrontation with either side might still spell doom if the Terrans weren't careful. Down in engineering, Chief Specialist Ray Anders fought to maintain the reactor stability. "Captain, we cannot keep doing this," Anders said over the comms. "We're developing microfractures in the warp coils, and the coolant reserves are almost gone." Captain Valance had the grim news. She knew they would have to consolidate their advantage soon, lest they be overwhelmed when the two factions finally got their act together and coordinated their revenge. In the hasty war council held upon the bridge of the Indomitable, Valance, Omeric, and the other senior officers fenced out an audacious plan. They would leverage each faction's desperation for control of the Sinora corridor to force them into a final confrontation. All-out decisive blow, the kind that shatters morale and sets off a domino collapse in the chain of command, might cause the entire engagement to fold in their favor. But it would also necessitate a daring strike that risked crossing swords directly with the most dangerous warships on the battlefield. All on the bridge knew what was at stake. If they did so successfully, they would demonstrate humanity's power beyond all doubt, potentially upending the balance of power in the galaxy. If they didn't prevail, the Indomitable and its crew would serve as footnote in galactic history, an ambitious but ultimately doomed bid for greatness. Captain Valance, his voice steady if laced with grim determination, said, "We've come too far to turn back. Let's show these aliens who they're messing with." The crew prepared themselves for the final stage of the fight. The TNS Indomitable, bruised but charged with indomitable spirit, was about to initiate a maneuver unlike anything the Xerix Dominion or the Vorkan Conclave had anticipated. The next volley would work itself out, determining not only the fate of the Sinora corridor, but the future position of an entire species that had been underappreciated for far too long. As the cosmic melee raged on around them, the Xerix Dominion and the Vorkan Conclave were shoved into a rare moment of temporary alignment. The Terran's interference angered both sides. Fleet communications crackled with rumors of a ceasefire, an uneasy halt to mutual hostilities, intended to neutralize the Indomitable once and for all. Despite deep distrust, necessity pushed them to coordinate, at least briefly. No side could make a clean victory of the Sinora corridor if the Terrans were allowed to continue their disruptions. Feeling a two-sided attack was imminent, Captain Valance gathered her bridge crew. Her plan was bold, nearly reckless. It would draw both the Xerix and Vorkan heavy warships into a common portion of a single, confined area of space, and then release the Indomitable's full-bloom Singularity warhead. It was a years-in-the-making experimental apparatus, the peak of Terran military engineering, intended to produce a localized gravity well of sufficient strength to rip capital ships in half. The catch: to deploy the warhead, the Indomitable had to vent every microgram of shielding for a few precious seconds, leaving the ship vulnerable to devastating counterfire. Lieutenant Omeric's voice trembled as he went over the plan. "Captain, even if we times it slightly off, we're just going to get pulverized by their combined barrage." Chief Engineer Anders continued. And if the warhead misfired, we could open up a breach that brings us all to our doom. And yet no one was suggesting that we back down, despite the ominous nature of these warnings. They understood that a breakthrough of some sort was needed to end this war quickly, effectively, and for everyone's sake. A column of heavy battleships advanced against the swirling expanse of Sinora in the Xerix Dominion's dreadnought, Imprex. The Vorkan conclave responded with their massive carrier, Vartham's Claw, surrounded by a pair of stealth battleships. Together, these behemoths prodded into the heart of the corridor, where the Indomitable remained, betwixt the clashing forces seemingly caught. Xerix and Vorkan artillery arcs crossed overhead, each faction attempting to box the Terrans in while keeping a wary eye on the other side. Valance seized the moment. She ordered a precisely timed barrage of kinetic lances toward the Xerix forward screen, goading them into stepping up their approach. Simultaneous to this, she had executed a feint against the Vorkan stealth battleships, forcing them to come within decloak range and inch closer to protect their carrier. Every time the Indomitable shot itself, it seemed more beleaguered, unable to keep up with its own swiftness. In actuality, the Terrans were driving the largest enemy ships toward the center of a grid point. Bait was taken by alien admirals. They thought the Indomitable was pinned and helpless, a soft target if they hit now. Xerix and Vorkan command channels, coordination vermoord, in G-combineerd barrage van energy bundles, torpedoes and railgun verliet door deruint snijden. The Terran flagship shuddered under a relentless barrage. Complete sections of armor plating buckled. Wailing alarm klaxons echoed in the Indomitable's corridors. Captain Valance in the Terran bridge clutched the armrests of her command chair until her knuckles turned white. Chief Anders, arm the Singularity warhead, she said quietly. A leaden silence settled over the crew. They had practiced for this eventuality thousands of times, but no one had really thought they would need to unleash such a devastating weapon. Yes, sir, Anders said, voice stretched thin. Charge is primed. We'll have to vent the shields at the fire right before launch. Valance said with a nod, her eyes dancing to the tactical screen. The timing had to be perfect. Now, barely a parsec away, the Xerix dreadnought Imprex painted large on the Indomitable sensors. The Vorkan carrier Vartham's Claw yawned out on the far flank. Together their ordnance raked across the Terran ship, pushing the Indomitable's field generators to their limit. The moment had arrived. Captain Valance keyed into the ship-wide address system. All hands, prepare for full shield drop. This is not a drill. Initiate emergency lockdown procedures. Thumps rang in every crewmember's chest. They knew that even one direct impact would cripple or destroy that ship in those few seconds without shields. But no one wavered. The Indomitable's thrusters roared to life in a final surge, pivoting the craft's underside toward the thickest concentration of alien capital ships. The shield emitters shut down with an alarming speed, arcs of sparkling light fading from the hull. Back on the Xerix flagship, High Warlord Kuraz Reth was getting ready to gloat. The shields have fallen. Finish them, he snarled. Vorkan Admiral Suresh also ordered a final bombardment. Weapons locked on to the Terran warship, just as the Indomitable's launch tubes slid open to fire the Singularity warhead. A dull thump resonated through the Terran hull. And then in the blink of an eye, several things occurred. A wave of alien fire rolled in, pointedly centered on the Indomitable's exposed frame. At the same time, the Terran warhead, a tapered missile topped with glowing fins, streaked into the void. Its own miniature reactor flared blindingly bright. When the device activated, it seemed as if the entire region of space, known as the Sinora Corridor, held its breath, and it bent the very space around it in a furious swirl of gravitational distortions. A wave of rippling darkness expanded from the warhead. Alien bolts and torpedoes were pulled from track, arcs of energy bending in the gravitational flux. The field of the Singularity throttled the biggest warships within its expanding bubble. The Xerix dreadnought Imprex pitched violently, hull protesting as its aft was drawn into a spiraling maelstrom of twisted space. The forward compartments of the Vorkan carrier crushed in like a tin can under forces that defied imagination. The Indomitable was shieldless and dangerously close to the swirling epicenter, which required max thrust firing on the thrusters to pull away. The vessel shuddered, the hull plating clattering from the battle waves. In fact, for a brief moment, it was unclear whether the Terrans would be eaten by their own creation. But Anders had calculated precisely. The Indomitable narrowly slipped clear of the outer edge of the gravitational maelstrom, bringing up at least partial shields in order to deflect some of the debris flying away from the ship. Back in the vortex, alien superstructures ripped apart. The singularity failed moments later, in a flash of destruction not often seen in celestial conflict. The proud Xerix dreadnought was a floating wreck, and the Vorkan carrier was a jumble of mangled metal, command decks ruptured to vacuum. A handful of support vessels, too slow or like swimming within the epicenter, were torn into impotent hull scraps. An odd hush fell on the Indomitable's bridge. Captain Valance exhaled a breath she had not known she'd been holding. "Damage report," she could manage to say. Lieutenant Omeric's voice quivered with both fatigue and triumph. "Severe hull damage to the starboard side. Shield generators offline, overloaded from that last burn. Reactor output is stable, however we are in no position." "Oh, but the enemy fleets, they're annihilated, Captain." In fact, the invulnerable behemoths that had constituted the power base of both the Xerix and Vorkan military organizations alike were gone, and so were their figurehead admirals. Vessels both small and capital, witnessing the destruction and their command structure decimated, began to scatter or make emergency warp jumps. The once fiercely contested war zone of the Sinora corridor fell into an eerie stillness. The Terrans, scorched and limping, hung in the center of a starship graveyard that bore witness to their underestimated martial prowess. As the Indomitable's crew wrestled with the enormity of what they had done, faint transmissions crackled in the wreckage of the corridor. Panic-stricken voices aboard alien corvettes or frigates, on open channels, pleaded to know the humans' terms for surrender or withdrawal. Others begged for medical assistance, surprised that the Terrans had called up such power. With one stroke delivered by humanity, it became clear that their so-called inferiority was an illusion. No single empire owned the Sinora corridor now, but it had been certainly molded to the will of the Terrans. News of the cataclysmic blow traveled through subspace relays to nearby corners of the galaxy. Allied worlds, neutral stations, their news bulletins repeated one single message over and over. A single human warship destroyed both the Xerix Dominion and the Vorkan Conclave's lead capital ships in a single blow. The fallout was immediate. Creatures that had never even heard of Earth scrambled for intelligence on these Terrans. The Xerix and Vorkan saw their allies, and themselves, reeling at the thought of any action that could force their fleets to be used when they no longer could, forcing them to abandon the core fleets to such a fate. And on Earth itself, the pockets of the Confederation who had celebrated a victory beyond their wildest dreams braced for repercussions. Inside the Sinora corridor, the Indomitable's crew stared out across the carcass of the battlefield. Flotsam and jetsam of warped steel, the remnants of indomitable dreadnoughts floated listlessly. Captain Valance stood up from her seat, repressing the shakes of her limbs. "Plot a course clear of this debris field," she said softly. "We just need time to heal and regroup." Her eyes scanned the battered bridge, locking for beats with those of her tired lieutenants. "We've changed the galaxy today. Let's prepare for what lies ahead." However, an undercurrent of foreboding remained, and although the immediate threat had been neutralized, there was still danger to be faced. Such a win would garner both admiration and resentment from the galaxy's entities. Whatever comes next in the way of chapters of conflict or diplomacy, one undeniable reality was already evident. They had not feared humans before. Thus, all empires would regard Earth with a wary, perhaps trembling, gaze. Over the weeks following the engagement of the Sinora corridor, shockwaves rippling throughout galactic politics. The diplomatic envoys raced to reinterpret Earth's status, once the butt of jokes, now an undeniable powerhouse. Interior regions long under the guiding hand of the Xerix Dominion and the Vorkan Conclave descended into chaos as local governors struggled to manage the sudden power void. Fleets from systems nearby retreated slowly, unsure if their previously unassailable expansions would remain that way. Messages began pouring in from civilizations big and small, flooding the comm channels of Earth's Confederation Council. Others sought alliances, hoping to wield Terran's strength against enemy threats or for others to gain from. Others threatened them in kind or insisted that humanity disarm the TNS Indomitable along with all singularity-based weapons. The Council held an emergency meeting to plot a diplomatic path. And though a new age of influence beckoned, the Terrans harbored no illusions that such power came without peril. Captain Valance was regarded as a hero all across Earth when she brought her after-action report to the Council, pride mixed with caution in her delivery for it. We have proven we're not to be trampled, but we must tread carefully. The galaxy now looks upon us with fear and ambition. On far-off star bases, rumors spread of superweapons in Terran development, wild exaggerations, mostly. But the Indomitable itself became a living legend. Stories of its climactic single-shot strikes circulated, some mythologizing it. Humans, pirates wondered, had mastered black hole technology? Arguing abounded in scholarly circles over how a species so young in space could out-engineer civilization's centuries, if not millennia, older. On even battered Xerix worlds, you would hear quiet speculation that the Terrans had cosmic patrons or some ancient secret. Fear started to change the previously dismissive mindsets. For the moment, the Indomitable hummed back to a small, secret Terran repair facility beyond the Sinora corridor. Damaged crews in hulking exosuits crawled over molten plating and ragged holes in the hull. Wounded crew members were cared for in medical bays, their expressions quiet mixes of relief and sadness for lost colleagues. Captain Valance walked from deck to deck, offering words of thanks and condolence. In a private moment, she was alone in the observation deck, watching the specks of light from repair lasers illuminate the darkness. The scale of their feat, recasting notions of the galactic in a single stroke, still felt otherworldly. In the wider galaxy, factions raced to readjust. The surviving Xerix and Vorkan admirals, leaderless and humiliated, attempted to keep their empires from shattering. Diplomatic cables filtered down to the Earth, seeking urgent negotiations to shape the new balance of power. At last, for the first time in record, neither the Xerix nor the Vorkan desired open war with humankind. A grudging respect had formed the buttresses, lightly reinforced by lingering hostility. Their transmissions featured fewer declarations of invincible power, giving way instead to more sober commentary. Among the smaller species, long oppressed, one saw a glimmer of hope from the Terran victory. If humans, who had been dismissed as insignificant, could best the greatest powers, perhaps the downtrodden races could attain autonomy. Some marginal worlds went independent, betting that Earth's precedent would dissuade retribution from larger empires. For better or worse, the Battle of the Sinora Corridor would be the catalyst of rebellious uprisings in every corner of the galaxy. The crew of the Indomitable were tales-tamed Ewins in the Terran Confederation. Statues were commissioned, and documentaries were produced. Soldiers who once silently accepted the scorn of alien militaries wore their uniforms, now with pride. But the euphoria was tinged with vigilance. Earth had entered into a spotlight, one that had triggered the ambitions and fears of countless galactic players. The next diplomatic moves could determine peace or war. As the Indomitable finished up with its repairs, its final flight check logs contained a simple truth. No one in the galaxy would ever ignore humanity again. Captain Valance, tired, assumed this task. She knew that the very future of Earth, and perhaps many other species, could depend upon how they used their newfound power. The battle for the Sinora Corridor was done, but the war for respect, stability, and survival had just begun. In the deep vacuum where star systems sparkled like shards of glass, a hushed awe fell over those who remembered the day a single Terran warship changed the direction of empires. Many across the galaxy had trouble accepting that humanity, once passing, was now a righteous force. From then, whenever the name Indomitable was uttered, it was not a tag that could be waved off or mocked. No longer eclipsed, humans had emerged with power and purpose. Your galaxy watched and held you in the balance. The others stared back, stricken, and you stood ready that day to shape your destiny, rather than let destiny shape you.